It's Monday afternoon in Switzerland and it's Space Café UAE time. Our new format, Space Café UAE, with Abdulla A and his great guest, Talal Al Kaissi, not Cassini, Kaissi, will begin soon. As always, we appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback. And if it goes today too philosophical, don't worry, we still talk about space. I'm Thorsten Kriening, publisher of SpaceWatch.Global, and we are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. With Abdulla, we found a wonderful friend and a great host for our Arabic outreach. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcasts. We also keep our fan shop open online for you to support us actively and becoming a space watcher. Edition 1 has cool items for you, your friends, and the ones you love, and your support is needed to keep our work alive, and we do that for you. If you have missed any of the previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the events section or on YouTube. We will host our Space Café UAE live regularly. With that, my job is almost done. And I like to hand over to your host in Abu Dhabi today, Abdulla. Over to you. Good luck.
Thank you, Thorsten. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of Space Café UAE. My name is Abdulla A. Wasel. I'm the managing associate of Wasel & Wasel. I'm the secretary to the board of directors of the Hague Institute for Global Justice. I'm a member of the Space Generation Advisory Council. And as you can probably tell by now, I'm the newest host of Space Café UAE. I'd like to introduce you to my esteemed, remarkable guest for today, Mr. Talal Al Kaissi. Talal is the Vice President of Group 42's Space Program and Special Projects, and the former Special Advisor to the UAE Space Agency's Director General on Strategic Projects. Now, prior to this, Talal served at the UAE Embassy in Washington, D.C. for 9 years, as a senior advisor for commercial affairs at the UAE Trade and Commercial Offices, and led the UAE-US Space Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Talal Al Kaissi. Talal, first of all, congratulations on your appointment as Vice President of the Special Projects and the Space Program of Group 42. Could you tell us how that appointment came about, and how do you see any alignments and visions and or objectives between your current role at Group 42 and with the work you did as a senior advisor for the UAE Space Agency?
Sure. First, Abdullah, let me thank you and say it's an honor and a pleasure to have been invited to be the first guest in this particular Space Café UAE series. Definitely a special thanks as well to Thorsten, who I have the privilege of calling a friend and someone who I think serves an incredible role with the strong, let's say, multifaceted platform that he has and addresses the kind of key ongoings in this domain. I'm a big fan. I have it as my homepage, SpaceWatch.Global, and everything that Thorsten does. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to contribute to this forum. So, I started with Group 42 back in October of 2020, so just a few months ago. And the way it kind of came about was by pure chance and coincidence. I wasn't really in the market looking for anything. I was very comfortably situated at the UAE Space Agency, where I had spent the last 2 years, as you mentioned, post my 9-year term at the UAE Embassy in Washington. Where I had initially got introduced to the space sector back in 2014. In the 2 years I spent at the space agency, a big portion of what I did was trying to help the Director General and the team over there build a space ecosystem here in the country and promote an investment strategy and a space economy. And by virtue of doing that for 2 years, we were very lucky that we've been able to kind of attract several very interesting and big name companies to the UAE from multiple different areas across the globe. One of the key ones that I was very interested in from back when I was in Washington was NanoRacks. I'm glad to see they have an office over here. SpaceX, we have investments with, and many other companies that we've come to enjoy in the quote-unquote new space domain. By pure coincidence, after the launch of our Mars mission back in July and the new leadership at the UAE Space Agency, the direction was being reset in terms of what the focus will be in light of the situation that we are living in with respect to the pandemic and the healthcare crisis, and how we want to be an enabler as a government. So we're not really looking at, from a government standpoint, the UAE Space Agency was not looking at the big programmatic types of things from a project standpoint, but rather trying to ensure that we were doubling down on the importance of the private sector and supporting and enabling the private sector to flourish and become a global brand from the UAE. At that point, there wasn't many, apart from a few startups that we had through accelerators, there weren't too many companies in that domain, but I had come across Group 42 who were doing some very nascent work in the space domain with geospatial analytics. And long story short, I met the CEO when we were discussing a specific deal that they were taking into consideration. And he shared with me his vision of how AI applies to both things that they're doing on a molecular level with genomics, and then how the ultimate use case for space is on that one extreme, and then the other extreme being the universal extreme, so to speak, and space. And so I immediately was fascinated by his vision and his aspirations, and long story short, I was swayed into going into the private sector to kind of practice what I was preaching at the UAE Space Agency in terms of encouraging private sector to start to grow. So that's kind of how it all came about, and it happened very, very quickly. And I'm very glad I took that step, and I'm able to still support the UAE Space Program, the UAE Space Agency, the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, but just with from a different vantage point.
Well, I have to say, Group 42 is lucky to have you, Talal.
Thank you.
But could you tell us exactly what Group 42 is and what it does?
Sure. So we're a privately owned company in the artificial intelligence and cloud computing domain. We are dedicated to kind of the development and both the implementation as well of holistic and scalable technology solutions. We operate within various different domains where we try to leverage AI and apply our high performance compute capability. We've got a supercomputer called Artemis. I know many people in the space community have an affinity for that name, and I don't know if that was taken into consideration at all when the supercomputer was named, but nonetheless, that's what it's called, and it is in the top 500 in the world, and is, I think, ranked number 26 today as we speak. And so we try to leverage that high performance compute capabilities, our cloud compute infrastructure, towards industries that include energy, smart cities, financial services, big data analytics, as well as healthcare. And then there are a few new nascent areas where we're testing things out. And you might have seen G42 all over the UFC recently here in Abu Dhabi at Fight Island. That's one of the areas where we're looking at sports analytics, to be precise. We've recently sponsored the Tour de France as well. So we're looking at different ways where we can leverage and apply AI. And we also have this horizontal layer in addition to the cloud computing layer, which enables many of these industries, which is a fundamental AI research and applied research institute called Inception Institute of Artificial Intelligence, that has a good amount of data scientists that are helping us do some very innovative things when it comes to NLP and large language scale models and things on the research side that gets translated into the domains we operate in. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we are and what we do.
If that's the nutshell, I want the full expanded version, because if you open the Group 42 website, there's not even a hint of all this multifaceted stuff. It says artificial intelligence and cloud computing, and they keep all this great stuff to themselves. But on a more serious note, these past few months or this last year has been truly trying times for everyone across the globe with the COVID-19 pandemic. And Group 42 has been an entity that stepped up and that has helped the UAE government in managing the COVID-19 pandemic. And I wanted to ask you, because you discuss healthcare, you discuss your involvement in healthcare in Group 42. What is Group 42's mission when it comes to COVID-19 management? What does it hope to accomplish?
Yeah, so this was one of the things that kind of confused me at the very beginning, I'll be honest. And I think you're right about the website, and we're working on it. So we'll have a lot more of a clear mission statement in a website, and all that is coming soon. We're one of the fastest growing startups you've ever seen. Trust me when I say that. And so, when I used to walk around the malls and see G42 stickers on cameras and thermal screening and all these other things, and then I hear that they're doing stuff on vaccines, and then AI, that I was dealing with them on geospatial analytics, I had no idea how all these things kind of related. But the easiest way to look at it is, AI is the common denominator between everything we do. Now, as it relates to the pandemic, we were kind of perfectly positioned to become a front runner in the fight against it, simply because in late 2019, we had just announced the launch of the Population Genome Program, which is the world's first initiative to create a high-quality Emirati reference genome. And this, the idea was to incorporate genomic data into healthcare management to revolutionize both the personalization and preventative healthcare. And so we built on that technology and expertise that we had acquired through that program, and we're able to pivot our focus and resources to sequence the genome of the virus and understand its mutations and support the UAE government in its response. We also did things, we were one of the first respondents when it came to manufacturing PPE, especially at the very beginning of the pandemic when things were of very short supply. And we also put our Artemis supercomputer to good use and made it available to health and research organizations from across the world to process, the large data sets in epidemiology, bioinformatics, and molecular modeling. So the other thing we did was on the rapid testing with PCRs. We were able to, in 14 days, establish a lab, the Biogenics Lab in Masdar City, that was a high throughput lab for PCR testing, tens of thousands of tests per day, which is what kind of positioned us as one of the highest testing per capita countries in the world. And then we did things like the COVID bubble for UFC to try to enable businesses to come back and operate as a business as usual. So we started off with the Fight Island thing, and now we're working on trying to help companies and government organizations get back to work with the enablement we're able to induce with our services. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we did on the pandemic side.
I mean, it's safe to say that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and then the most important thing I nearly forgot was the vaccine. So we held the largest clinical trial for a vaccine in the Middle East and the largest in the world when it came to diversity. We had about 200 nationalities, or I think 200 nationalities live here. About 125 or so were participants in the clinical trial. So we were one of the keys. We spearheaded the effort in trying to ensure that we had a safe, inactivated vaccine that we provided to the UAE population. So that was another big area that we got into as well.
I mean, listening to all this, it's safe to say that Group 42 has been a superhero in this last year, especially for the nation, for the UAE. And you mentioned how it's a young entity, but it's the fastest growing entity. And that's what I like. It's a wonderkind entity per se. So I want to ask you, what is G42's long-term objectives and what is its long-term mission?
Yeah, and this kind of will translate into how space is on the forefront of it. But let me start by saying, first of all, in terms of everything that we've done to date, it's really been a product of the visionary leadership of the company, as well as the government's confidence in us to execute. And that's kind of been something that I think you have to have both to have the product be what it is. And we're still going through teething problems and learning as we go. There's a lot of trial and error, but to the most part, we're very lucky that we have the support and we're provided an opportunity to serve. The mission and long-term objective is kind of, if you think about it, we're in a domain where we know the inevitable eventuality is that you're going to reach a certain level of intelligence that is superior to what it is today. So we live in an age of artificial narrow intelligence. We know for a fact, assume any rate of progress, whatever time frame you want to look at, And whether it's Moore's law or Wright's law or whatever it might be, you'll get to a point where artificial general intelligence, where a more generalized version of this narrow intelligence, super intelligence that you have, will take place. And we want to be as prepared as possible for that. And we want to a certain extent, help move the needle on that and be on the forefront and the cutting edge of getting to a point where generalized intelligence is part of our lives. And from that point, it'll become very easy to conceive of a world where there will be artificial superintelligence, because arguably, if we're able to create artificial general intelligence, then that general intelligence is as smart as we are, if not a little bit more, and can create something just like itself or smarter. So we need to be very, very cognizant of what is to come and prepared for it, to try to make sure that we're making good use out of it to the extent we have a level of control in it. And so that's kind of the impetus perhaps around the drive behind G42. And so I'd say that's kind of where our vision lies as it stands right now.
I like how you sprinkled in a little philosophy there at the end. You just touched on it because we're going to get more in depth into that later.
Sure.
You mentioned how we're living now in the artificial general intelligence era. Artificial narrow era. Yes, correct. But as we proceed towards the artificial general intelligence era and further into the artificial superintelligence era, I want to ask you, what do you think is going to happen to the synergy between artificial intelligence and space exploration? And further into that, how far do you think this will take the space sector itself?
Yeah, I was wondering where you were going to go with that. It's a tough one. I do think about this a lot. I think both artificial intelligence and space are force multipliers for one another. And it's not something new to both domains. Both have been kind of benefiting from each other for the longest time. Everything that we do in space is based on a certain level of autonomy and systems and computation that you can't really do on your own as a human. So I think what we will see happen in the future is artificial intelligence will become much more part and parcel with missions and the way we design missions from the inception to ensure that we are maximizing the potential of the outcomes we are after. Both on the exploration front or even in terms of like things that we use space to enable terrestrial applications. So I think they both work hand in hand, and they will only get more and more kind of intertwined in the next few years.
Okay. So, I mean, I know you said they both work hand in hand, but your role specifically at Group 42, what does it entail? Are you more embedded into the artificial intelligence spectrum, or are you focused on the development of the space exploration spectrum? Or is it a hybrid of both per se?
Yeah, it's definitely a hybrid of both as it stands today. I've only been at the company for a couple of months, and I think we had no space program per se. We had we've dabbled into the space domain as it related to some geospatial analytics. So we're kind of compartmentalizing that and consolidating it under one entity and bringing in the different expertise we had both on the data science side and then the remote sensing side into a company that we had acquired in 2020 called Bayanat from Abdulla. And so that's kind of where the program per se is being housed. And at the same time, I have a broader kind of aperture on the company wherein my function supporting the group CEO. So I kind of balance my time, I would say, if not 50-50, then 70-30 in whichever direction, depending on the week, amongst both the AI applications at large, amongst all our other businesses, and then the space program. And I'm very lucky. I have a few very strong individuals in the space area that are holistically focused on that.
Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about Group 42's artificial intelligence capabilities, but it's important to emphasize that Group 42 has its toes dipped in two very important spectrums of space exploration, those being artificial intelligence and cloud computing. Now, Group 42, if I'm correct, has a next level cloud computing infrastructure and a remarkable broad spectrum of data resources. So my question is, how do you think G42 can use this infrastructure to advance the space sector, specifically with satellite data processing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's exactly in line with what we're thinking about building out. That's something, we have a cloud infrastructure, for anyone that's unfamiliar with what our cloud infrastructure is like, let's say we are building the third largest kind of cloud hub that we're operating here in this part of the world between the East and the West. And so there's a great value proposition in terms of the cloud capacity, and then also the bespoke solutions that we could provide by layering some interesting AI on top of that and tailoring it to whatever the use cases are in different industries, and regardless of the type of security levels required for that data protection. So to us, that's a great value proposition and platform to build on top of. And today, when you look at the low Earth orbit, for example, constellations that are out there, both with optical imagery and synthetic aperture radar and even RF constellations, there are many different companies that are starting to produce a plethora of data that for the first time is going to have a very high resolution spatial and temporal resolution, and that's something that we plan on ingesting into our cloud. So we're going to be completely data agnostic and allowing different platform providers, including other analytics platform providers, to plug in and utilize that dense data source to provide for their analytics and for their customers. And so we're building our own geospatial analytics platform, but we're allowing others to kind of plug into it as well, so that we don't have to compete necessarily head to head with anyone, but we'd rather complement and provide a service and really become an enabler to geospatial analytics companies all over the world and the data providers that are producing this data for the first time.
Mm-hmm. You see, that's what I like about Group 42 is in the 1950s, when Eisenhower first declared that they would be sending a satellite to space, it was almost a space race per se. It was which nation was the fastest to go to space. Now there's been a realization that space exploration is truly a team effort, and Group 42 embodies that. Like you said, you're not competing, you're enabling. You're seeing how far you can take this. But I want to divert this to the philosophical aspect of artificial intelligence, because I know you touched on it a bit, but I really want to dive into this. If you've seen, this episode is titled Group 42, A Space Odyssey, which is a play on Kubrick's beautiful film, 2001, A Space Odyssey, which, among other things, details the relationship between artificial intelligence and space exploration. Now, in this movie, there's a supercomputer, an artificial supercomputer called HAL. And HAL's role to assist the astronauts in their missions. But things start to go wrong when HAL's super consciousness and human personification causes it to cause harm to the astronauts themselves. So my question to you here is, considering the hypothesis of existential risk that comes with artificial general intelligence, is there a worry that artificial superintelligence with an acute human personality and a consciousness might cause harm to the astronauts that it was built to assist?
Wow. I'm not an authority figure to anthropomorphize here and give you my impression of what HAL was thinking, but I'll tell you, first of all, great name for the episode. And by the way, just so everyone knows, the Group 42, the number 42 was inspired. Our CEO was inspired by The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the number 42 being the answer to life, the universe, and everything. So that's kind of it. Like, I thought it was a coincidence, but that is in fact the inspiration behind the name. Not many people know that yet. So
fun fact, make sure you go tweet it.
Exactly. But to your point about HAL and artificial superintelligence in the future taking over in some sort of way, I think, look, I wouldn't want to look at it that way. I think we need to, look at the benefits that artificial intelligence can have and is having currently in its narrow scope. And identify ways that we could ensure that, number one, our intelligence is kind of staying on par with, human collective intelligence is staying on par with whatever general intelligence and superintelligence we are trying to devise, or at least catches up to a great extent, and we can augment human intelligence to that level, utilizing artificial narrow intelligence. But more importantly, if you think of the dystopic future that people paint with artificial intelligence, sometimes it's that there will be this Terminator scenario, and I don't fully subscribe to that. I don't think there's any inherent hate from these non-sentient beings that would be one day arguably more intelligent than the human species. But rather, the scary part is that if their only instinctive role is survival, and we are arguably the only thing that gets in the way, then it becomes just like we don't necessarily hate insects that much. I mean, we do. They're pests. They get in the way, and when they get in the way, we try to swat them away. So I wouldn't want to be in the position of an insect, just getting in the way of survival of another type of artificial being. We would want to try to ensure that what we do is preserving the ability of our planet to continue to survive. And that's kind of more philosophical. You have to think of things from a global warming standpoint, geopolitical issues, all these things that we need to try to really solve, regardless of whether or not you reach a point where there's an artificial superintelligence that then decides, we don't like humans. I don't think that's what I'm worried about as much as trying to even get to that point without having some sort of cataclysmic event take place during the journey.
Everyone has different worries. I mean, yours is that, and mine is the fact that we might be considered insects by artificial intelligence. But look, you know me. I'm a lawyer. I studied law all my life. So when we talk about science, I was always the one to question the legality of the science. Now, in the 1980s, international legal scholars began to explore the idea of whether artificial intelligence required an adaptation or an extension of current regulatory and legal frameworks with respect to liability issues and legal status. But at that time, there wasn't an artificial general intelligence. There was an artificial narrow intelligence. It was simply cloud softwares. Now we've gotten to the period of supreme technological advancement, and we're still furthering this advancement by the day. So I want to ask you, who's going to regulate this artificial intelligence? And specifically, who's going to regulate the application of artificial intelligence in space?
Yeah, did you say 1980s? I didn't know it went back all the way till then. I mean, that's incredible to know. Yeah, that's something I learned. To me, I think it's fascinating that regulations have not been able to catch up to technologies as quickly as maybe they should. Regulations, over-regulating is always a bad thing. I look at things from a business standpoint, but certain things that are dangerous to society in general or could pose an inherent danger should have some form of regulation. I think here in the UAE, we're quite lucky that the government kind of sees the value in, even if we don't fully understand something, including artificial intelligence, we have an AI ministry and an AI minister. And that's kind of a breath of fresh air when you think about the motivations behind it, but more so how it could induce a decent journey toward a decent path towards realizing some of those regulatory framework. Because if you think about it, artificial intelligence today is kind of analogous to what nuclear weapons were like back in the 60s or whatever it was when they first came about. And the fact is, you can easily regulate, and the same reasons you would want to regulate nuclear weapons is the reason you'd want to regulate artificial intelligence. Not because you think artificial intelligence will have the same type of impact as a nuclear weapon, but there are certain things that could potentially happen with a ripple effect that if it's unchecked, would put humanity in a very detrimental position. And the fact is, many different countries are pursuing artificial intelligence and arguably are much further ahead and can really accelerate much easier than the pursuit of nuclear weapons ever was. And so if you think of those types of aspects, it's easy to see why regulation to a certain extent, and it has to be something where on a global level, someone has to take the first step, but on a global level, because we don't all share the same values. That's the truth of the matter. We have the same values in terms of wanting to live and seeing our kids grow up and go to school and education, but from a political standpoint, from political lens, there aren't the same values in each one of the different countries where they're pursuing these technologies. And so it's important for there to be some sort of a body that kind of provides some oversight, and at least if not enforces, provides recommendations and brings to the forefront the different scenarios. So that's kind of how I look at it. And I'm glad that we live in a country that sees the importance of having a government level overlay of regulating this very important domain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I completely agree with you. In 1966, we had the Outer Space Peace Treaty that was signed, and that's kind of the Magna Carta of space law per se.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be wrong to have another treaty that's ratified by the majority of the countries to be put in place for artificial intelligence protection. And then with respect to the UAE, you're completely right. The UAE is a nation that's only 50 years young, and it's now become the 5th nation to launch a mission to Mars, which we'll talk about later on. But yes, I truly agree. The insatiability of the nation that's allowed it to evolve at such a rapid rate is truly phenomenal, and it's exciting to see. But let's go on to the European Space Agency before we go on to the UAE. And when we look at the European Space Agency, they talk about the fact that there's nearly 34,000 objects bigger than 10 centimeters that pose serious threats to existing space infrastructure. And if I recall, you spoke about the management of space traffic at the Secure World Foundation Summit for Space Sustainability. So my question, I did my research into you, Talal, don't worry. So my question is, should space traffic management be top-down with a global agreement, like we talked about, on rules and standards, or should it be done from the bottom up with industry practices enshrined in national regulations? And
I lost volume, Abdullah. I just want to make sure you can still hear me.
I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
You can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay. I lost volume on my end for some reason. Let me... Okay, I hear you now.
Okay, perfect.
So you were saying regarding space traffic management?
Yes, so space traffic Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, from that conference, Secure World Foundation, I do remember, I'm glad you really dug deep to get that. I actually filled in for someone there. Our Director of Policy and Regulations was supposed to do that. He's much more qualified than me in terms of top-down and bottom-up. But I'll tell you from an industry standpoint, for me, I think it should be a hybrid of both. I think it should be, to a certain level, top down, but then also companies that have a vested interest in the domain from a commercial standpoint, we need to continue to encourage and enable. So they have to have a voice on and a seat at the table where these regulations are being designed. It's an important area and one where, at least on the G42 level, I've been kind of contemplating perhaps how we would be able to use our supercomputer and our cloud infrastructure to support with the effort on global space traffic management and space situational awareness. I'm a big fan of Dr. Marie Baja and others who are working in this domain. There are some others as well that are doing some very interesting things on the with decentralized systems and blockchain. I know L3 and others are working very hard on trying to build some sort of a distributed ledger type system that could help track and support the management of space assets and avoid debris issues and mitigate certain conjunctions. So these are areas where we're currently looking at how we could maybe carve out a niche for G42 and design a strategy where we'd be able to play in that domain.
Okay. So with that being said, let me ask you, apart from geospatial analytics and space traffic management, is there any other area the Group 42 is considering with respect to its space capabilities?
Yeah, I think there are a few others that come to mind. Obviously, we're looking at different types of areas where we would be able to leverage maybe investments to a certain extent, if it makes sense in terms of how we would be able to utilize or bring in the portfolio companies. One area that I'm very bullish on in terms of what AI can do to support is even astronomy. So we're talking to local observatories over here, like El Sadim Observatory and the astronomy division at NYU, and talking to MBZ UAI, trying to figure out ways that we could maybe contribute our resources and our capabilities to help make new discoveries in space with exoplanets and what have you. So I think there's a lot of value in that. Maybe it's not straight ROI and very lucrative profit margins, but it's still nonetheless a great contribution and a way that we could position and utilize our quote unquote muscle and infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. And I agree. I mean, speaking from a business aspect now, it's not always on the ROI. It's at the end of the day, it's also on what's it going to do for the community. I mean, every business has its corporate social responsibility, and at large, this is a big investment that could help humanity evolve even further. And we'll talk about the space investment scene in a little bit. But I want to go back to this idea on movies, because all my knowledge on space comes from movies. So if you've probably seen Christopher Nolan's masterpiece of a film, Interstellar.
Oh yeah.
There you go. It's a good 4-hour watch if anyone has time. So you have to recall the TARS and CASE, which are the AI astronauts, the AI astronaut assistants. Those are with legs, and they have consciousness and a human personality, and they're quite advanced. Now, the International Space Station deployed Simon in 2019, which in a slightly similar nature to TARS and CASE is an assistant for astronauts in their mission. So my question is, what do you think the time frame for the development of a fully conscious AI astronaut assistant is? And how will the programming and software that goes into its effect in the pre-space exploration stages, such as mission and planning design take place?
Yeah, so I think I don't know. With regard to fully conscious, I don't know how you would define that in the context of an artificial intelligence. But if it's kind of analogous to what human consciousness would look like, maybe that's kind of doubtful even. But nonetheless, I think you can have super smart types of systems, much more advanced than the systems like Simon that are already there, that would augment the human astronaut and their ability to conduct exploration missions. And in addition to that, I think you'd also find, since today spacecrafts are robotics, and they are even our Mars mission, for it to be captured by the Martian orbit, had to have certain programs, certain instructions programmed into it for different what-if scenarios. And so there's a level of autonomy and robotics and artificial intelligence that goes into that. But something that's more generalized perhaps could have the potential of becoming a digital astronaut, quote unquote, and be able to go places where we can't go as humans because of our biological substrate and the constraints that that presents when it comes to radiation and other types of issues with extreme environments or the long durations of travel that are required. So that's what I'm very excited about. The types of robotic missions that we'd be able to do in addition to the spacecraft type of robotics and AI that we're currently conducting, but something with more dexterity and versatility in terms of a system or a humanoid type of, I don't want to anthropomorphize again, but there may be place for different types of systems, a lot more intelligent, that could do things that we would never be able to do. Unless, obviously, genomics gets to a point where you have genetic modification that could protect a human being from the harsh environment of certain areas in space. But I don't think we'd ever want to send a human into a black hole. But sending one of these things, why not? Or to the edge, at least.
Of course, yes. Just add the insurance onto it and then just get the payoff from that. So I want to ask you, you kind of discussed what's slowing down space exploration from a human aspect, but I want to ask you in a general sense, what are some of the key issues that Group 42 believes are slowing down space exploration, and how are you aiming to address and solve these issues?
Yeah, I mean, from a general level, I think, the thing, technologically, we are extremely much more advanced than people appreciate. And there's so much more that can be done from a technological basis that the only reason it doesn't happen is mainly political will. Capital plays a role, and obviously capital allocation these days are more geared towards the healthcare domain, just by virtue of us being living in a pandemic. But I think political will is a big one, and we saw the product of strong political will in our Mars mission and what we were able to accomplish here in the UAE within a short time span. What I think from a G42 perspective, we will focus on is how do we ensure that regardless of what the ultimate objective is when it comes to exploration, let's say we're looking at ways to live on Mars, we're looking at ways to make the moon as habitable as possible and demonstrate technologies there and make it a much more frequent occurrence for humans to go to the moon. I mean, people haven't been to the moon since, for over 50 years. And so it's important for us to try to bring it home in terms of the benefit. Especially since, again, we're living in a pandemic. So let's show people the benefits of healthcare research on the ISS. Let's show them the benefits of plant genomics, for example, on the ISS. Different types of things where it really ends up hitting home and shows the importance of the investments into the space domain. And that it's not in lieu of the healthcare sector, but it's actually going to help support it from an R&D standpoint and from many other, even more relatable in the energy domain, for instance. There are so many parallels, so many ancillary benefits of investing in space technologies, where if you're able to solve something with food, water, or energy in space, then arguably you have an amazing solution for an Earth-based problem that you're facing. So those are the types of things that we're going to look into, drawing the parallels and attacking those as we can.
Okay, so you touched on capital and you touched on the investment, and I want to ask you, how do you see the investment scene right now in the space sector with the advent of more space companies publicly listing through special purpose acquisition companies such as VG Acquisition Corp and Momentous, and what is G42's aspiration when it comes to these space investments that we talked about?
Yeah, so I mean, there is definitely a trend, and more companies are looking to expand their capital allocation pools by looking at these types of innovative ways of IPOing without having to go through the whole process. So the SPACs are becoming much more of a commonplace amongst companies. It's very trendy these days. Now, I'm not an authority figure to opine on whether or not I think that's a good idea, but I would venture to say that I like models. The traditional private equity or VC type model is interesting. The problem there is the time horizon, and with space companies, you typically, especially when they're in their early stage, you typically need more than that 5 to 7 year time horizon for it to bear any fruit. And so that they're typically constrained in terms of the models that they're able to operate under. I like things where you have companies like Voyager Space Holdings in the US have this very interesting model where they're able to provide more patient capital and prolong that, assemble capabilities, bring like-minded companies together, take majority stake, have a shared services function, and they're able to then leverage on each other's strengths. So the technical folks do the technical stuff, and they do the business things, and they bring in an assembly of capabilities that take things to the next level. That's an interesting model. I sit on the board of New Space Capital. I also love the model they have in terms of looking at the supply chain of the space industry in Europe in particular, and how, from our perspective in the UAE, we want to tap into some of those portfolio companies and these supply chain companies because they'd be relevant to the aerospace industry, the healthcare industry, the energy industry, and otherwise. So those are the ways that I would look at trying to figure out where G42 would play on the investment side.
Okay. And I mean, we discussed this a bit previously, but we want to congratulate the UAE because a few days ago, UAE's Al-Amal, which is hope in Arabic, their Mars probe entered Mars's orbit, which is truly a historic feat for the nation. So it's a massive round of applause for the nation and all that it's accomplished in such a short time. And the UAE's investment into the space sector and its space project amounts to 22 billion dirhams with a 9% annual growth rate. So, Talal, what do you believe is the next step for the UAE's space sector? And how far do you think the nation will go in terms of space exploration in the coming decade, let's say?
Yeah, first of all, congratulations to the leadership and to the people of the UAE for this accomplishment, but particularly of the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center and the UAE Space Agency for pulling off what seemed like an insurmountable type of feat, even before having to think about how to logistically get a spacecraft to the launch pad during a pandemic. It was an insanity. From January until March and April of last year, and then till launch. I was a witness to it firsthand, and the amount of perseverance that had to take, and the sacrifice that people had to make with their families, where they went from before even Ramadan and spent all the time in Japan with the spacecraft from, I think it was March until July, until it launched, was hats off, incredible to say the least. I think in terms of what comes next and what happens going forward, the visionary leadership here in the UAE had set a target, 100-year goal. It's a big ambition and aspiration to have a habitable settlement on Mars by 2117. Back in 2017, they stated this objective and this vision. And each one of those steps that you see that are taking place right now are incremental steps in that direction. So it allows them some latitude in terms of how they would reconfigure the different types of facets that would lead you to that eventuality, and either bring the date closer or stick to it. What matters is that the vision is there, it's set, and the objective is clear. We are looking at having a habitable settlement on Mars by 2117, and ensuring that we can solve the key big issues in terms of trying to make it habitable, energy, food, and water being the three critical ones. So what happens on the way, and what the different programs become in that trajectory is still TBD as far as I know. And that's where we can all chime in with areas where we feel well positioned to carve a niche. In our case at G42, we want to find a way that we can apply AI and become a key contributor to the global space community with AI in space. There are other areas that I think are very interesting as well. Energy, we can leverage our heritage in the energy domain with exploration and mining and even nuclear energy, and figure out ways that we could move the needle on bringing some of these technologies to help enable the different types of settlements that we're trying to develop both on the moon and on Mars. So other things, if you think of like SpaceX, the reason that they've been able to accomplish so much is they've made a business case out of the reusable rockets that they're looking at potentially then using for a settlement of Mars. So the fact that you're able to reuse a rocket brings down the cost so much. The one thing that you can't really reuse yet or refuel yet are the spacecrafts or the satellites. So there's a missing architecture, missing part of the architecture of interplanetary exploration, being orbital depots, for example, propellant depots and propellant manufacturing and ISRU on other planets. And these are areas where the UAE is very well positioned to maybe play a key and significant role. So that's kind of how I would hope the direction goes.
And we'll definitely see what's going to happen, because the way the UAE has been expanding this is truly phenomenal. And my last question for you before we finish off, just to tie everything up, if Mars becomes inhabitable, would you live on Mars?
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't say no to this. I don't understand how you could say no to this. Talal, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. You are phenomenal.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, Abdullah, and thank you for the great questions. This was a quite unique interview. I think one of the most unique that I've ever taken part in. So thank you.
I'll take that as a compliment. My questions were,
Absolutely.
yeah. Thank you so much, Talal. And before we finish this, I think I see some questions in the Q&A here. So Ray is asking about the potential commercial applications based on the UAE space programming, such as 5G, 6G, and IoTs.
Yeah, plentiful, I would say, plentiful. I think I actually just saw a headline recently. The Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center signed with OQ Technologies out of Luxembourg, a very good company over there. I was very excited to see them make entry into this market. And it's particularly in this domain. We at G42 are obviously very interested in IoT generally across the board, and so if we can find a way to help, build in an angle where space becomes an enabler to it, I'm all ears and completely open to it.
Next question, Malouf says, from a legal versus tech perspective, how is G42 dealing with the delicate relationship between AI and human rights? In other words, do you consider human rights to be innovative features or barriers to progress in relation to AI? Malouf must have studied philosophy in college. I like the question.
I like the question too. I just don't think I'm the authority figure to try to answer it. G42, we are focused on technology and delivering solutions to our customers. We're not really thinking about this too much right now. We will obviously ensure that anything we do does not infringe in any way on human rights. It's a key core principle and guideline that we have in our DNA. So that's probably all I can say on that topic.
Mark Nicholas says, hi Talal, what are your thoughts for the development of the permanent UAE presence in LEO and Pupil on the ISS for commercial applications in the Gulf? All the best, Mark. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, Mark, it's good to hear from you. So to me, I think it's important. LEO is extremely important. We have an astronaut program in the UAE, and I'm looking at ways that G42 can be supportive of that from a genomic standpoint, and also in terms of what we could do in terms of experimentation in low Earth orbit. So as a platform, I completely agree with the importance of ensuring that there's a permanent spot in low Earth orbit for commercial use and experimentation. And I'm glad to see several companies playing in that domain and trying to move the needle on migrating away from the dependence on a government infrastructure in low Earth orbit. How is the UAE looking at it? I left the agency a few months ago. I support them in whatever they call me for. They haven't called me about this. I don't know to the extent they're thinking about a platform in low Earth orbit, but I would say they're probably interested in ensuring the utility of low Earth orbit is uninterrupted.
Next question, Kevin Webb says, do you foresee a time when quantum computers will be a reality? Thank you for the question, Kevin.
I'm not too, I think I would, again, in the limited knowledge I have on quantum computing, and this is an area where I've literally just started scratching the surface on recently. It's a very fascinating area. I would assume that there will be an eventuality where quantum computing will be, a commonplace. But how it will apply to space, I'm sure there are ways. But again, I'm not an authority figure on quantum computing, so I wouldn't be able to really opine there.
Isam says, one of his questions, unfortunately, we can't answer all of the questions because we've run out of time, but all of the unanswered questions will be sent to Talal. He can answer, and then, we'll send them back. We'll post them on SpaceWatch.Global. But last question, Isam says, is there a plan to leverage G42's skills in AI into space industries from UAE? And what would the opportunities be for startups to contribute in this domain for UAE startups?
Yes, 100%, Isam. Thank you for that question. I think for us, it's important to be looked at as a potential enabler to start the startup community and the space industry. So anything we can do in terms of providing support from a cloud computing, cloud infrastructure, AI, high performance computing, data scientists, what have you. Those are things that we have that we would love to ensure that we are making available to startups in the space domain here in the UAE to help expand the ecosystem and create more customers for us. The other thing is we will also want to be recipients of things that startups bring about, right? So if there are companies that are doing some innovative things that we feel we can benefit from, if we formulate some sort of a partnership, then we're all open to that as well. We're all about partnerships right now, especially in this early stage of our evolution as a company. We're big believers in not reinventing the wheel. We really want to leverage what others have and work towards a single goal of expanding human knowledge and ensuring that we're able to maximize exploration value of space while also making money as a commercial company.
So thank you again for all the questions. Like I said, if there are any questions that were unanswered, we will be sending them to Talal, excuse me. But these are very exciting times. Here is a full set of our upcoming events. Tomorrow, on the 16th of February, Torsten's guest will be Dr. Jessica West from Project Plowshares. A week later, on the 23rd of February, his guest will be Nikolai Klostov from the World Economic Forum. And on the 2nd of March, he will host Blaine Curcio, the hashtag China Space Guy. And then in the same week, on the 4th of March, SpaceWatch.Global will launch the first Space Café Germany by Andreas Schepper, followed by the first Space Café Russia by Elena Morozova. All of these events are going to be on Eventbrite, so you can sign up there. And as always, we would love to hear all of your feedback, so please check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to sign up for the daily or bi-weekly newsletters of SpaceWatch.Global. And if you like to treat yourselves with something special, become a Space Watcher today. Your support will help us. And take your credit card, visit our fun shop at shop.spacewatch.global. I know that I repeat myself, but we need your support to continue this work. Thank you all very much for your interest today. Talal, again, thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. I'm going to go to bed dreaming of us living on Mars with AI helpers.
Thank you.
I hope we all stay healthy and safe. And thank you all for joining us today. I hope to see you next month or next week for the events, next month for Space Café UAE. And in the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget to become a Space Watcher. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning into the first episode of Space Café UAE.